Big week in the offseason for the Boston Red Sox down at the winter meetings down in Dallas, Texas. Tim Crowley from NESN.com, joined by TC, Tom Caron, who is down in Dallas for what should be a very busy week. TC, appreciate the time and what should be now a very interesting one for the Red Sox.
Yeah, Tim, I don't think there's any doubt about it. Yeah, everybody here is pretty thrilled by the timing of the Juan Soto announcement. 29 teams are not thrilled with the decision, especially 3 or 4 teams, especially the Red Sox and Yankees, who thought they were in on it. But, by getting it done Sunday night, there really was a feeling this morning when everybody got out here in the lobby of the Hilton Anatole in Dallas that teams are pivoting now and they're going to get to work. And the Red Sox are one of those teams.
Now, we can start there. Where does this team go from here? Again, I think everyone knew going into the offseason that Soto would have been a great bonus, a great add to be the face of the franchise, but the need was never another left-handed bat. The need was obviously in other areas, particularly on the mound.
Yeah, and that's where it starts, right? I think even if they had announced the deal with the Red Sox last night, right? If the Red Sox had announced that they had landed Juan Soto, I still think I'd be talking to you about pitching this morning because the team needs pitching, it needs help. I think at the top end of the rotation, probably the back end of the bullpen as well. But it all begins with a starting pitcher. I think they dive right into the free agent market there. They've already had remote meetings with Max Fried and Corbin Burns. I'm hearing a lot more talk from the Red Sox about Fried than about Burns. I think Fried left-handed, won a World Series with the Braves, gives them a little of that experience and leadership that they're looking for. Burns has been really good. He's been a little more durable, and he pitched in the American League East last year. So he'd be a great fit as well, but they'd like to get a left-handed starter in the mix. I think you begin there, and then you also look at the trade market. Is Garrett Crochet a fit? We know that the White Sox want to rebuild, and they want to use that trade as a way to jumpstart the whole process. The Luis Castillo stuff out of Seattle, I think, is really interesting. He's under contract for 3 more years. He's a durable veteran who's proven himself. And I think the Red Sox, I've said this really since the end of the season, Tim, I think they match up really well with Seattle because Seattle believes their window is now. So you could be talking about, an Abreu, a Casas, if those are the guys you want to look, guys who can help Seattle now, as opposed to Chicago. I think Chicago would want to dig into your top prospects. They start throwing Roman Anthony and Marcelo Meyer and Kyle Teel around. I'm not sure the Red Sox are ready to give those guys up.
Does it still feel that maybe that's the avenue that happens this week, that 2 starting pitchers are still definitely an option, that it is, Fried and then pursuing one of those trades, that getting 2 starters at some point, whether it's this week or throughout the offseason, still seems like a realistic goal for them?
I think so. And I think that's the sort of upside of not getting Soto, right? If you were really contemplating $700 million plus to get Soto done, then tying up $200 to $300 million in a couple of pitchers and maybe a bat. I still think you need to add a bat. They'd like a right-handed bat now, and we can get to that in a moment. But I think 2 starting pitchers is still a real possibility if you get one via free agency and one via trade.
Let's talk about that right-handed bat that you mentioned. Obviously, they've been looking for that for a while to be that number 3 hitter that can really slide in and separate the power between Rafael Devers and Tristan Casas. Teoscar Hernandez really seems like the pivot from Juan Soto that would make the most sense. There's the history of the negotiations last year. Where do you kind of see that market going, and how realistic is it that maybe the Red Sox can get that second chance to bring Hernandez to Boston this time around?
I think it's a real good possibility. I do think it depends on the Dodgers because I think Hernandez has made it pretty clear he wants to go back to LA. Had such a great experience there, was so good with them in the playoffs and obviously winning a World Series. They had their better shot at him last year, right? It would have been a lot less money. It wouldn't have cost you the compensatory draft pick that it'll cost now. Of course, they got one for Nick Pivetta, so that would kind of be a wash, right? You lose the pick you got for qualifying Nick Pivetta. But I think Teoscar Hernandez would be a great fit, that pull power. Last year at the end of the season when Alex Cora said, we got a lot of lefties who can hit it off the wall. I'd like to have a righty who can hit it over the wall. He is certainly that guy. I think the other names are Alex Bregman, obviously. But the positional fit gets a little interesting there. He said he might play second base, so maybe that's where he could slot in. But you got Christian Campbell ready to come up. You still got Vaughn Grissom, who's still very young, sitting around. So we'll see if they got Bregman, how they would move things around in the infield to get him in there. And then, with the Orioles signing Tyler O'Neill over the weekend, Anthony Santander's got to go somewhere. He had 44 home runs last year, switch hitter. But he's got power from both sides, obviously. Not as easy a fit because the Red Sox feel they're pretty well set in the outfield. He'd have to go there, but we'll see how that plays out. what I really find interesting about this team, they were third in runs scored last year. So the offense wasn't the problem. But that said, it's still an ill-fitting roster in a lot of ways. Cedar Rafael has bounced around and maybe ends up being a super utility guy. We'll see how that plays out. You've got Roman Anthony, the top prospect in all of baseball, knocking on the door. But you got Duran in center field. You got a Gold Glover and Abreu in right field. You got Rafaela kicking around there somewhere. You got Ref Snyder, who can mash against lefties as a really good guy off the bench. And then sort of clogging up any of the movement is Masataka Yoshida at DH, who won't play outfield, especially now after surgery. Represents a lot of what the rest of the team does, and he puts the ball in play. He doesn't strike out. He can spray it to left field, so he's a good hitter in that. But he's not really a prototypical designated hitter. You want someone with a little more power. So maybe they got to move him, and if they do that, that would be percents on the dollar. So they do have some things to sort out on the offensive side, even though it's pitching that they need the most.
That analysis right there is probably why I want to come back to the Bregman point, because the fit is so unorthodox, I guess, but still interesting to this team because the bat fills a need, right? It's a big name that would come back to Boston with championship experience. But that really does make it complicated, right? Because, the second base option has been talked about. There was the willingness that may be there. But there is the kind of weird part of, okay, what happens with Rafael Devers? What happens? Do you have Christian Campbell, still in a position to play opening day? Like, what do you make of all the different chain reactions that could come of a potential Bregman move?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I talked to a bunch of Red Sox people today. They all made it pretty clear. There is not a plan in place to move Rafael Devers off third base. There's kind of been, I feel, a lot of reports that are hinting towards that. Now, listen, if you trade Tristan Casas and you added Alex Bregman, then you might have to look at that moving things around. But maybe Bregman can play first base instead of third base, right? I don't think there's a guarantee. They haven't said that, but I don't think it's a guarantee that you'd move Devers across. But I did notice that they wanted to make it clear that there's no plan in place to move Devers off third base. And I think that's important to know. So if he's going to stay at third base, where does Bregman go? If you keep Casas, it would have to be second base. And then maybe Campbell starts getting groomed as a utility guy, or maybe ultimately a shortstop if Trevor Story ends up injured again, or anything like that. And maybe just allows you to pump the brakes on him coming up a little bit. Maybe you leave Campbell in Worcester to begin the season. And he's coming out that one great year. Let him build on that and continue to build the confidence. But I just think, Vaughn Grissom is interesting because you traded Chris Sale for him. It was really one of the first big moves of the Craig Breslow era. So he's not going to walk away from Vaughn Grissom. He's still the youngest guy on the roster at the end of the season last year. And so he's going to get a shot. It's like, this guy who's hit everywhere he's ever been, just had injuries all last season. It'll be interesting to see what a healthy Vaughn Grissom can do.
Got a few names for you just to go rapid fire before we get you back to work in Dallas. It goes against the Devers report, but the name keeps swirling around. Nolan Arenado. What do you think of that one?
Here's what I think, and here's what I've heard from Red Sox people. If the Cardinals are serious about moving him and are willing to pay down some of his salary, any team, including the Red Sox, would be extremely interested in getting him. And again, that's a guy, then you'd move Devers, I think, because we know what Arenado can do. And he brings, remember, him and Story have a relationship and they go back. And you start talking about that left side of the infield being locked down. Devers could become first base, maybe some DH to keep his bat in the lineup every single day. Again, not a plan in place, but something you'd have to consider if you got Arenado. I think Arenado would be a good fit on this team, even though it wouldn't be an easy way to fit him in.
They already have two left-handed relievers that they've signed this offseason, and Justin Wilson and Aroldis Chapman. But what could you see of a potential market for Tanner Scott if that's still an avenue the Red Sox could pursue?
I think they would love to get Tanner Scott. And if that means you got to move with one of the other guys you already got, so be it. But there's nothing wrong with having three left-handed pitchers if they can throw. And they want velo. They want experience on the back end. You're banking on Liam Hendricks, and if he's anything close to what he was, he's going to be your closer to begin the season. Michael Fulmer's coming back, but there's a lot of guys coming back from injury here, right? And Chapman's not getting any younger, so you're banking on those guys. But I always call it the Todd Jones effect, right? The Red Sox had Todd Jones in 2002. I'd have bet the house he was washed up. I think over the next 3 years, he had like 150-something saves for the Detroit Tigers, right? Relievers, David Ardsma was in Boston. Then he went to Seattle, where he's a lockdown closer. Relievers are interesting. Another down year, come back and have a good year. So I love the idea of rounding up as many relief options as you can. And then you just kind of wade through the injuries and wade through who's having an up year, who's having a down year. And hopefully by Memorial Day, you know what you got. You got a good bullpen.
Last name on the docket for you that may become a little more interesting after the news of Juan Soto signing is Pete Alonso. It's a right-handed bat that obviously would fit a need. And there was that report from Jeff Passan over the summer when obviously the Mets were in a very different place that had thrown out the idea of, all right, maybe this is an avenue the Red Sox can pursue. Is that maybe something now that looks a little different at the winter meetings and sometime this offseason?
I haven't heard much talk about it, honestly, but not since, there was talk about it last year. Doesn't mean it resurfaces. And now with the Mets, tying up all that money, it's hard to imagine Alonso goes back. But Steve Cohen apparently has an endless checkbook, so we'll see how that plays out for the Mets. But I like Alonso. Obviously, he gives you that power we're talking about. It's a swing that would play at Fenway Park. A lot of strikeouts come along with that as well, and I know that that's something that has been one of the problems. And it's the second most strikeouts as a team in the American League last year, and they had a lot of strikeouts if you remember, with men on in scoring position, with 2 outs. A lot of rallies were killed by those strikeouts. So again, power that would complement this lineup, no doubt about it. I don't think it would be their first avenue as they pivot from Soto, but it would certainly be one of the plans if they keep going down different roads.
TC, the last one we'll have for you should be an eventful week for you throughout your coverage. What in your mind would be a successful week down in Dallas this week for the Red Sox?
I mean, the dream scenario, right, would be you get Fried, you trade for Crochet, and you get Teoscar Hernandez, right? I mean, if you got those three guys, I would argue that is a far more successful offseason than signing Juan Soto would have been. And you're probably doing it for less money total, right? So I think, and you can replace, you want to replace Burns for Fried, you want to replace Bregman for Teoscar Hernandez, I'm fine with all of that, right? But give me the impact bat, ideally right-handed, to balance that lineup a little bit. Give me a top-of-the-rotation starter in free agency, and give me an upper-end rotation starter in trade. And I think you are right back in business, and you're talking about competing for the American League East title in a deep playoff run.
Should be an eventful week down in Dallas, Texas for the Red Sox. Be sure to stay tuned with NESN and NESN.com all week, as well as with Tom Caron. He'll be down there covering this one for us. TC, appreciate the time and have a great week down in Texas.
Thanks, Tim. Good stuff. Appreciate it.